All right, let's look at the printf method. So printf is used for controlling the alignment and spacing in printouts. And there's good news and bad news. The bad news is printf is complicated. There's a million options. But the good news is twofold. First of all, it's super similar to the version from C++ that it was based on. So if you already know how to use printf from C or C++, you can pick up the Java version in just a couple of minutes. The second piece of good news is you don't have to use it. Printf is supposed to save you time. If you just want to use string concatenation and print line, which is what we've been doing up to this point, you can do so. So pick it up as you go along, but eventually, if you're an experienced Java programmer, you'll probably want to know about printf. So the idea of printf, it takes a variable number of arguments. The first argument is a string, and then there's some additional arguments. And the string at the beginning has placeholders that begin with %. And then the values after that get substituted in for the placeholders. So the first value here gets inserted there. The second value here gets inserted there. And the fact is, if you're a beginner, the only thing that you have to learn as a placeholder is %s. S means treat it, display it as if it were a string. If you want to control the number of decimal points, or you want to put commas in, or you want to round it off or something, then you have to worry about some of these other things like %f. But if you just want to display it and substitute it in, the only thing you have to know is %s. Anything can be displayed using %s. Okay, it's also useful to know that %n means a new line, like a carriage return. And so if I say print system.out.printf blah with no %n, then those two blahs come out next to each other on the same line. But if I put %n's at the end, then they come out on different lines. So printf with %n is like print line. Printf with no %n is like print. All right, so it's just shorter than string concatenation. If you just add a whole bunch of things together with pluses and pluses and pluses and pluses, it's just long and tedious. So that's the main advantage. But the point is, if that doesn't bother you to use pluses, you can just use print line. So you don't have to learn printf to be, a useful Java programmer. You have to learn lists and maps to be a useful Java programmer. But printf, you can just kind of postpone until the first time that it really buys you something, and you can kind of learn it gradually as you go along. Printf also lets you control the width of results, so you can make things line up. And for numeric output, you can control the number of digits so that the output looks consistent. So when Java 1.0 came out, I started using Java when it was in beta in fall and winter of 1995. And when the final release of Java 1.0 came out in the spring of 1996, they bragged, hey, there's nothing so ugly in Java like printf from C and C++. Ooh. And so when Java 1.1 and 1.2 and 1.3 and 1.4 came out, Java kept bragging, we don't have anything so ugly in the Java language like printf from C and C++. Ooh. We have something much more elegant with decimal formatter and things like that. Well, eventually the Java designers realized that the things that they said were more elegant than printf, every Java programmer in the world hated 10 times as much as anybody had ever hated printf. So when Java 5 came out, the Java designers said, okay, we made a mistake. Mea culpa, we will put printf into the language. And so printf was added into the language in Java 5, even though it was deliberately kept out in earlier versions. And, the C programmers in particular were dancing on the rooftops, but even the normal Java programmers found that printf, even though it's a little bit confusing, is just a lot more convenient for formatting things. Okay, so here's a quick example. Look at the output. You want to say, John Doe has 7 chickens. And you want to produce that based on 4 separate variables: a first name variable, a last name variable, a number of pets variable, and a pet type variable. Let's do it with printf and with printline. With printf, you make placeholders. So the first name gets passed in for the first placeholder. The last name gets passed in for the second placeholder. The number of pets gets passed in for the third placeholder. And the pet type gets passed in for the fourth placeholder. And if you want a character return at the end, don't forget %n. Whereas if you use string concatenation, you'd have to say the first name plus a space in between, plus the last name, plus has with spaces around it, plus the number of pets, plus a space, plus the pet type, plus a period. And so the first one is just more readable. This is kind of a template for what you want the output to look like, and the values get substituted in. This example alone is enough. If you've never seen printf in another language, don't worry about all the fancy options I'm going to show you in the next couple slides. Just learn this slide. Use %s to output something. Anything can be outputted with %s. It can be an actual string or a number that you are going to treat as a string. Put placeholders, supply as many arguments as you had placeholders, and don't forget a %n at the end. Okay, so if you've never seen printf in another language before, the example on the previous slide is enough to get started with. Use %s as a placeholder in the formatting string, and however many %s placeholders you have, that's the number of arguments to pass in, and the first argument that you pass in after goes for the first %s and so forth. Don't forget to end it with a %n. And so printf is pretty complicated. It has its whole little mini language. And there's all sorts of options for controlling the width and the number of digits and whether you should put commas in, whether it should be left justified, and whether it should show dates with the month first and then the day, or the day first and then the month. There's a whole giant mini language. Don't learn it now if you're new to printf. Learn the basics on the previous example with %s and %n. That's all you need to know at the beginning. And eventually, when in real life you have an example where you need to have very precise control over formatting, remember that it's possible and go look it up in the online API and read the details. So the details on printf, if you haven't used printf before, should be one of the lowest entries on your priority list of this lecture. However, there are a lot of options and they're very useful. Perhaps the most useful one is %f and its associated options. %f has to do with floating point number. So a double begins with a D, and so you think you should use %d, but it's f. F means floating point, not a whole number. Okay, and so look at this example over here in this right-hand box. %6.2f. That means I want 6 total places for the number. If the number takes less than 6 total places, pad it with spaces on the left-hand side. So the 6 means the total number of spaces. The dot means I want to show a decimal point. The 2 means I want to show 2 entries after the decimal point. So it's going to round it to the nearest 2 digits after the decimal point. And notice that the decimal point and the 2 things on the right count as part of the 6. So the decimal point is 1, the 2 digits are 2 more, that's 3. So I've got 3 left over to go on the left-hand side, but if it's less than 3 on the left-hand side, pad it with spaces. Okay, so then there's a whole bunch of other options for other things, like for dates and for like whole numbers. You can take a look at those, but that example is enough. Use %s, and you can control the width of numbers and make them line up on the decimal point. All right, so let's try this. So I have some CEOs of various different companies, and I have their salaries in billions per year. And I want to print out and line up their salaries on the decimal point. Well, when I do that, and I say, okay, I want to have commas every 3 characters on the left. I want 8 total spaces, and I want 2 after the decimal point. For this to work, I need to know something about the possible range of values, because the 2 will truncate. It'll round to the nearest 2 decimal points, and it'll only show those 2 decimal points. But the 8 will not truncate. In other words, Java will never throw away the significant digits to the left of the decimal point. It's showing the wrong number. But throwing away the digits to the right of the decimal point is an approximation to the right number. So this lines up, This lines up. This lines up. Notice the comma. But this does not line up because there are more than 6 to the left of the decimal point, and Java never throws away significant digits when you give the spacing. So if you want to line things up on the decimal point, you need to know something about the possible range of values to do so.